First of all, Happy New Year, everybody. And Paul and Laura, thanks for putting all this on and making sure we can all keep in touch with each other, because never underestimate the importance of day-to-day contacts, discussions, and exchanging ideas. Whenever we're doing campaigns in my area to open a new community centre or something, I say, you never know where this will lead to, who will meet who at this centre, what will happen as a result of it. And in a sense, what we've got here is an online socialist community centre. So well done, and thanks ever so much for doing it. Had we won the election in 2019, my first statement was going to be funding to every local authority to immediately end all homelessness, all rough sleeping homelessness immediately. It can be done. It's quite possible. There is no need for it whatsoever. And when we were dealing with the early stages of the pandemic in 2020, the Prime Minister was refusing to even acknowledge there was a problem, ignoring what the World Health Organization was saying, and telling everyone how he didn't really like them or trust them. And then there was a concerted Tory campaign to cut funding to the World Health Organization. They eventually changed their minds on that and put a little bit more money into it, not very much, but they did put some more in later on. But I think the pandemic has shown the worst and the best of our society. The best has been the health workers, the delivery workers, the cleaners, and all the groups that have done so much, care workers, of course. And the worst has been the greed of Serco, of all the other companies that have got contracts out of the Department of Health, and this massive growth in inequality in the world, where the biggest corporations, think of them, Amazon, Facebook, Google, etc., have done incredibly well out of all of this. And in most countries in the world, the poorest are considerably worse off than they were 2 years ago. And in our own country, there are now more food banks than there are branches of McDonald's. Doesn't that say it all about modern Britain? And I think the worst aspect of the past year has been the media acceptance of the poverty and inequality that goes with all this, and this hypocrisy of applauding health workers, then denying them decent pay, applauding care workers and allowing them to try and survive on minimum wage, and then Tory MPs helping out at Christmas at food banks. Well, they're the ones that cut universal credit. They're the ones that have created these unbelievable levels of stress and poverty in our society. And it's global also, because the refugee crisis, and it is a crisis, is brought about by war, instability, human rights abuse, environmental degradation, and so on. But every one of those 70 million people that have got no home to call their own are people. And are we to pull up the drawbridge, put up the barbed wire fences, put up all the surveillance equipment, and assume that somehow or other the issue is going to go away? And so I think there's a few people we should take our hats off to. And some of those are in the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, those the coastal communities around Britain that have welcomed refugees that have struggled ashore. And despite whatever the Tories say, nobody willingly puts themselves and their children in a cheap, inflatable craft to try and cross the English Channel in order to get to a place of safety. Nobody does that willingly. You do it out of total desperation. And then you start to look, if I may just say this, on the causes of refugees around the world. The biggest group at the moment are from Myanmar. Fairly obvious why. The Myanmar army has been persecuting Rohingya people for 50 years, and it's got worse and worse. And most have got to Bangladesh. Others have been floating around in leaking boats in the ocean, and finally Indonesia has admitted some this last week. And then all over the Americas, as Haitian refugees. Now, ask yourself this question. Haiti achieved its independence from France in the late 18th, early 19th century, led by Toussaint Louverture, who ended slavery and tried to establish a first Black Republic. The price was high. It was high in lives that were lost and in the massive, massive debt that was heaped upon Haiti to pay off the slave traders and the owners of the country. That was in the early 19th century. Go forward 200 years, and the debt is still there, bigger and bigger and bigger. Haiti's never had a chance of proper development. And those that are refugees from Haiti around the world, they're the ones that are victims of that. They're the modern victims of the historic injustices of colonialism. So there's a lot we can think about here. And then we can do things. And I think, to me, the highlights of the year, there's been many highlights, was the day we had the march in Liverpool against the International Arms Fair. Anna was there and others were there and pointed out that sell arms to Saudi Arabia, you're not really in a position to complain about the bombing of Yemen. You're not really in a position to object to the cholera and all the other wholly preventable diseases that are killing the kids in Yemen. If you sell arms to Israel and they're used to bomb Gaza, or they're used to evict families from Sheikh Jarrah and to expand the occupation of the West Bank, and now, apparently, with American approval, there's going to be a doubling of settlements in the north of on the area that was taken over from Syria many, many years ago, known as the Golan Heights, then we are complicit. And so it is up to us to understand power play in the world. So there's two things I want to say on that. It was after that fantastic march in Liverpool, and it was a fantastic march, and it was, I've never been on a march before where you go through a shopping centre, because normally you go through a shopping centre on a march, and I've done this many times in London, and people come out the shops and sort of moan about the traffic being held up, moan about the buses being delayed, or just moan because of lack of anything else to do at that moment. In Liverpool, they even came out of the pubs to cheer us marching past against the arms fair in their city, and I was so proud of that. And then later that day, I went to Wigan for the Diggers Festival. It was massive, absolutely massive, and great fun and joy there. Think about it. Would Gerard Winstanley and all those others diggers at the time of the English Civil War have believed that 450 years later, people would still be celebrating their vision of a world where there was fairness and distribution of opportunities for land use and all that? So I think there's a lot of things to be very, very proud of. My hopes for 2022 are that we build that sense of solidarity. We build on the victories over fire and rehire. We build on the victories of those that have fought against school closures, that have fought against cutbacks and all those things. But above all, the environmental campaigners that came to Glasgow in such massive numbers. And whilst the conference itself was a huge amount of greenwash, and I still don't understand what Jeff Bezos was doing there. Maybe his rocket landed in the wrong place, I don't know. But it's sort of bizarre what went on in the main conference. But the message that you will only get a climate change in a good direction if you have social change in a good direction as well. You cannot go on building an exploitative society that promotes consumerism at the expense of conservation unless you have a changed system. And so it shouldn't be the preserve of the middle classes to say they care about the environment. We all do. We all care about the environment. And it's working class communities that breathe the worst air, eat the worst food, have the shortest life expectancy, not just in Britain, or in Western Europe, or in the USA, but all around the world. So there's lots to be hopeful for of what will continue. And we ended the year with a great high. Gabriel Boric elected president of Chile. Elected president of Chile against somebody who was brought up, was trained, was developed by General Pinochet. Chile finally turned its back on the horrors of the Pinochet years and the oppression that went with it, turned its back on the neoliberalism of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. There's lots to be very, very optimistic about. And I've just been checking on my computer, and there's a wonderful bookshop in my area known as New Beacon Books, founded by John LaRose and others in the 1960s to promote Afro-Caribbean and other literature. And it's been threatened with closure. And in 2 days, we've raised £60,000 to ensure it stays open and becomes that centre for the learning of the history of colonialism for all children. Because if our children are brought up understanding the realities of world history and that we all get knowledge from everywhere in the world, then that's the way to a non-racist future. So I am very hopeful, very optimistic, and I promise to be very active throughout the year on lots and lots and lots of causes, because I think that's my job.
Keep the red flag flying here.